Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Today is Father's Day, and today's show is dedicated to my dad, Rick Crane, which I have a message for I'm going to share with him that I'm going to share with you. But I think you're going to love today's show, regardless of whether or not you're a father or a parent yet. And I don't know if you're a guy or a gal, but here's the thing. We have an important job as parents and as humans, and I'm going to talk about that today on a special day, which it is Father's Day.
Cowboy.
Welcome to a daily dose of greatness quest with your host Trevor Crane, my daddy. He is going to help you take your life and business to the next level.
Here I come to save the day.
Trevor Crane here, 11-time #1 best-selling author and the founder of Epic Author Publishing, coming to you live every day so you can plug in every day to build your ideal business so you can live your ideal life.
If my daddy can do it, then anybody can do it because he's a weirdo.
You're supposed to make me sound cool.
So I've been thinking a lot about this message that I wanted to send my dad and what it means to be a father and our most important job as fathers, and what's the difference between being a dad and being a mom. You know, we just had Mother's Day a month ago or so, however long it was, and I sent a private message to my, not private, I shared it with you guys. I sent a message to my wife and to my mom about the amazing mothers they are. And in thinking about my dad, what I found that there was one common theme that showed up in my dad. Now, my dad had a lot of strengths when we grew up, and he had a lot of challenges and weaknesses. And I didn't really know all the weaknesses of my parents until I got to be a teenager when I finally knew everything. You know, when I was a little kid, I thought my mom and dad hung the moon. And when I got a little bit older, I realized that they were human and they made mistakes. Now, my dad gave me this one thing, and he never, from my recollection, ever did not give me this one thing. I think it is our most important job as humans, not just as fathers, but as mothers and good friends and whatnot, is to give people this gift. And honestly, it's a challenge to do. And the gift is one of unconditional love. Now, when I was growing up, I can't remember a time when my dad didn't believe in me. I do remember a time when my dad got mad at me. I do remember a time when my dad spanked me. He gave a very special moment and memory in my childhood where my dad took me to the woodpile and knocked me in the ass, bare ass, with a 2x6 because I had done something to hurt my sister. And he thinks it's a hilarious story. He will just tell it and drool when he's laughing. Laugh so hard he drools when he tells this story. It still brings back tears to my eyes. But here's what my dad did. I can't remember a time when he didn't believe in me. When I was 7 or 8 years old, we went on a camping trip, and my dad liked to do that with horses. So we took horses to the top of this mountain. We put horses in the horse trailer and had to drive over this mountain to get to the place we were going on this pack ride. And my dad's truck overheated. We lived in Arizona, and the truck was not able to make it up the mountain, and my dad was concerned that he was going to fall off the side of the mountain. Like, it was a dangerous thing for my dad. So he said we had no choice. He stopped the truck on the side of this dirt road on the side of this mountain, and he took all the horses out. I think we had 4 horses, and he handed them to me. I was 8 years old, and he said, "Trevor, you need to walk these horses up the mountain while I drive the truck and trailer up because this truck's not strong enough to do it. And it's overheating and we're having a problem with it and you got to do this." Now, it was nighttime. That means it was dark. And I was 8 years old. And I don't know if you know about this, but horses are like almost 2,000 pounds. Your average horse. And I was scared to death. But my dad looked me in the eyes and he told me that I could do it. My dad told me that when I was 11 years old, and I wanted to do pull-ups. And I came to him, and you may have heard me tell that story before, but I wanted to do 11 pull-ups because I wanted to beat my friends at school who had taken some physical fitness test, and they had done 10 pull-ups. I went to him crying and all upset because this was an important thing to me at the time, to beat Scott Symington and Mike Powell and do more pull-ups than they did. And I could only do 5 pull-ups. My dad told me that I could do 11. And he gave me a little formula. He believed in me. He didn't just believe in me, but he gave me a path to do it. Now, was my dad always loving and sweetness and light? No. Sometimes he spanked my ass. Sometimes he loved me enough to go ahead and give me punishment when I needed it because I was a little punk. And when I was growing up, and years ago, this is not when I was 10 or 8 or anything like that, but I was a young man in love with this gal, and we were dating, and she was staying at my house, and I was out of town. And a friend of mine tried to crawl into bed with her, went in my back door that I did not lock, tried to crawl into bed with my girlfriend and date rape her, basically make her think that it was me crawling into bed with her. And I was so angry. I was on the other side of the country. I lived in Florida at the time. I was visiting California someplace. And if I had been around this kid, I probably would have killed him. Like, I was so pissed off when I found out about it. My girlfriend called me up, and she was scared and upset and couldn't believe this had happened. And nothing actually happened, apparently. So it's not like he had raped her or anything. But just the fact that he had this desire to. Now, I had a few days before I could get back home. And in that time frame, I had a really challenging thing. I had to decide what I was going to do. Was I going to kill this kid? Literally, I had these visions of some evil things I could do to him that probably would have killed him. And instead, I had some friends of mine that I was hanging out with, and they asked me really good questions. And I came to an answer of what I should do. And blew my mind that this was an answer. But it was to forgive him. And it was almost like I had a godlike or fatherly love for this kid. I'm like, how could I forgive him? It didn't even make any sense. Like, I wanted to punish him. But I realized it wasn't my job to punish him. And what would happen if I just forgave him? That didn't mean that I wanted him in my life, but that if I went ahead and just forgave him and loved him unconditionally, not saying that what he did was okay, but just not taking it upon myself to punish him. And what would that mean? So I came up with a silly analogy just in my head so I could figure it out and come to terms with the fact, how could I love this kid who had tried to do something not nice? Let's just say that trying to date rape your girlfriend is not nice. Not nice to your buddy and not nice to the gal. Okay, I think we can all agree with that. And so what I did is I fired this kid. He was working for me at the time, believe it or not. And I came home, but instead of punching him, fighting him, being mean to him, a variety of things that I could have done, I didn't want him in my life anymore. I loved him enough to set him free. I loved him enough to know that he was bigger than that he was better than that. But instead of coming home and punishing him and punching him in the face and a variety of things, I confronted him, had a conversation with him, and it was amazing the type of fatherly love. It was like a godlike love that I felt like I had for him. Now that sounds weird maybe, but I figured that God loves us. My Father loves me. He didn't say it was okay when I screwed up. And when I look at my daughter and when I look at my son now, this is years after that I actually had children, I look at them with the same type of love that I feel like I got from my dad, where I believe in them, I love them, and I love people enough to do what I think is right and to sometimes speak harshly. See, when you give unconditional love, it doesn't mean that you always have to be loving and happy, lovey-dovey. It means that you love somebody enough, in my opinion, to do what is right. And in that case, what was right was to get this kid out of my life, the rape situation, and to forgive him and let it go so that I could move on. And to take responsibility for how I had put him in my life and put in a dangerous element in my life that actually broke into my house and hurt my girlfriend. And that was my responsibility. And so I owned it. See, a fatherly love that is unconditional is unfucking conditional. And so I now challenge myself every day with that as a father to go ahead and offer that unconditional love to everybody I come in contact with. That's my kids. That is my wife. And that's everybody I meet on the street. And it's challenge. Sometimes I want to punch people in the face. And that's, and I don't know that that's unconditional love. So here's my challenge for you today on this beautiful, amazing Father's Day, is to define for yourself what unconditional love means. Because I believe unconditional love is the secret. Now, you need to define what unconditional love means to you. Now, that's my challenge for you today. I want to go ahead and talk to you a little bit more about my dad here and just tell a couple of funny stories because I think they're relevant. Another one about my dad believing in me. So I was a little kid and we went snow skiing for the first time. And my dad took me to the top of this mountain. And we took me down the bunny hill once. He goes, there you go. Now you know how to work on skis. And he goes, now let's go to the top of the mountain. And he dumped me off and he said, let's do it. You can do it. Like I said, my dad believed in me. Now, I cried my little eyes out, and I cursed, and I was scared, and it didn't work. I don't know how much I cursed as a little kid, but it was a scary time. But my dad believed in me. So then years later, I think I've shared this story with you before if you've been listening to my podcast. I took my dad out to the Galapagos Islands scuba diving. So I became a scuba instructor. And one of the things I learned about adventure and travel and all this cool stuff is I just want to share all the fun things that I do with other people, and definitely my loved ones. So I got my dad to join me in the Galapagos Islands on a charter that I hired one time. I started an adventure tours company, which meant that I would hire a boat oftentimes and to take us someplace and do something cool. So I did that in the Bahamas and British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos. The Galapagos was a really big trip we took, and I challenged my dad to go through scuba school really quickly, as fast as possible, and then join me in the Galapagos. So he did, and we're on this boat, and my dad we're getting the initial briefing of how to dive with these hammerhead sharks and potentially whale sharks and all these challenges. And they talked about how you typically need about 200 dives to be on this trip. And my dad looked at me like eyes big as saucers, and he was like, what? Trevor, like, I don't know if I'm good enough to be if I'm able to do this. And I said, remember when you took me to the top of the mountain? Like, this is payback time. So I got my dad back. My dad joined me doing a lot of different things. Let me see what over. Let me see. This is a show that's for my dad. So I'm gonna also tease him. My dad also gets seasick. So I had my dad out on this boat. He would wear those little dots that you can put on your neck, and he'd put like 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 of these things on himself so he wouldn't be vomiting. But of course, he got sick on the trip. He went to the British Virgin Islands with me. I think we did the same thing. He got sick when I had him in the Bahamas once. I was snorkeling, and I was holding my breath diving down to go spear a fish. In the Bahamas, you're not allowed to spear fish on scuba tanks. You have to do that on just a breath hold. So I took a deep breath, and I dove down to about 40 feet where there was this little artificial reef. Someone had dumped an old truck chassis off this coast, and some big fish would sometimes live underneath it. So I dove down, and the only time you're supposed to make any noise when you're spearfishing underwater is if you see a shark. So if you see a shark, you don't want to shoot a fish because then the shark will come over and you could have problems. And so I heard this yell. Now sound travels quite far in water. You can't even tell what direction sound comes from in water because water is thicker than air and it ends up transferring the sound really fast. And so at any rate, I'm underwater. It's crystal clear. So I could see all the way to the surface from the bottom of the ocean. And I hear this, and I was all pulling back to shoot this grouper underwater. And pulling back meaning I had this slingshot type spear that I was going to shoot at this fish. And I look all around and I don't see a shark. Now that was the sound, by the way, that you make, like you yell in the water if somebody sees a shark. So I went to pull back and shoot this thing a second time, still holding my breath, mind you. And I hear this yell again. And I'm like, what the? Okay, I better not shoot this fish. There must be a shark in the area. And it was pretty adamant every time I pulled back on this fish. So I swim up to the surface and I'm swimming in circles and I don't see a shark anywhere. And I get up to the surface, I take a breath, and I look around, and my dad is up at the surface, and his mask is off of his head. There's this streaming line of foamy vomit all over, like this big circle all around him. My friends who are diving instructors are like in the water, and they're swimming frantically over to him because it looks like he's about to dip into the water and like drown. So I don't know. That story really means nothing to anybody other than me and my dad, but I think it's funny. And let me see. The last thing I'm going to share with you today is a dad-ism. I don't know if you have any phrases that your father used to come up with, that they seeded in your mind. But one of, and this will be the quote of the day, is can't never did nothing. So when I was growing up, like I said, my dad believed in me. That was one of the things I just realized about my dad, is he gave me unconditional love, but that means that he really wasn't willing to take any of my bullshit. And I was constantly a little kid who said, I can't, I don't want to, and this isn't going to work and all that. So if I came up with can't, then my dad said, that's the dad-ism. Can't never did nothing. That's the quote of the day. And the extension of that is how that showed up in my life with my kids is we don't allow the word can't in our house. So if somebody says, my daughter or myself specifically, I don't really do this with my wife, I can't, even if we say it any way, shape, or form, then we have to do 3 push-ups. So right now, my daughter just recently broke her arm, and so she owes me, 20 or 30 push-ups because she got out of the habit of whipping out push-ups right when she does it. But, all right. Well, that's all I got for you today. This is a bit of an episode for my dad, but it's a bit of an episode for you. So please do. The challenge today is to define what unconditional love means to you. I explained a couple of situations where it made a difference in my life and how I challenge myself every day to give that to my kids, my wife, and the people that I come in contact with, to love them enough to have the self-trust in myself to do what I think is right, regardless of the circumstances, and for you to define what unconditional love means to you so that you can actively go out and share that kind of love with others. Unconditional love, I believe, is a love that you give regardless of what you're going to receive. You do it without any desire and intention to receive anything back. It's just what you give, regardless of whether or not somebody likes it, whether or not somebody thinks that they agree with you. I give it regardless. It isn't to make everybody fucking happy. It's to go ahead and do what I believe is right and good and honorable and respectable. And then I love people enough to go ahead and do things that they may not like. I love people enough to say things that might make people think poorly of me. I don't give a shit. I'll do what I think is right regardless. And I got that from my dad. My dad doesn't exactly operate with those exact same principles, but these are the lessons that I learned from my dad. And Dad, happy Father's Day. I love you. And hey guys, I can't wait to see you tomorrow on another daily dose of Greatness Quest.
To get even more awesomeness, which means all my best stuff, download my app by texting Trevor to 36260. It will show up right on your cell phone. Just text message the word Trevor to 36260. Talk to you soon.